Imagine the temperature drops 40 degrees in a single generation. The rivers slow. The ground freezes so deep that nothing grows for 8 months of the year. The megafauna that your ancestors hunted, the woolly mammoth, the cave bear, the giant elk, are retreating or dying, and you have no shelter beyond what you can build with your hands, no stored food beyond what you killed last week, and no map of what lies ahead. This is not a thought experiment. This is the world your ancestors woke up in roughly 26,000 years ago, at the peak of the Last Glacial Maximum. And somehow, they made it through. That fact alone should stop you cold. The Last Glacial Maximum, the point at which the most recent ice age reached its greatest extent, saw ice sheets stretching more than 2 miles thick in places. In Europe, the tree line retreated hundreds of miles south. Average global temperatures were roughly 6 to 8 degrees Celsius colder than today. Not slightly chilly, genuinely, profoundly, lethally cold. And your ancestors, fully modern Homo sapiens with the same brain you carry now, survived it. How? The answer is not one thing. It is a stack of adaptations, technologies, and social strategies so sophisticated that archaeologists are still piecing them together. And when you look at what those strategies actually were, you realize something uncomfortable. Your ancestors were not just surviving. In some ways, they were thriving. Start with the body. Your ancestors did not have a biological advantage over the cold. Homo sapiens evolved in sub-Saharan Africa. You are physiologically a tropical animal. Your body loses heat faster than a Neanderthal's did, faster than a woolly mammoth's did. So the first problem was simple: stay warm or die. The solution your ancestors engineered was clothing, not just wrapped furs, but tailored, sewn, insulated clothing. At the Sungir burial site in Russia, dated to around 34,000 years ago, archaeologists found the remains of individuals buried with thousands of mammoth ivory beads sewn into their garments. The bead placement tells us the clothing had sleeves, had trouser legs, had a hood. This was not draping an animal skin over your shoulders. This was design. This was engineering. The needle made it possible. The oldest known bone needles found at sites like Denisova Cave in Siberia date to roughly 50,000 years ago. A needle with an eye, small enough to thread sinew through, allowed your ancestors to stitch skins tightly together, to create layered systems that trapped body heat the way modern thermal gear does. The physics has not changed. Trapped air is an insulator. Your ancestors knew this empirically long before anyone had language for it. Shelter was the next layer. In the treeless periglacial steppe that covered much of Europe and Eurasia during the Ice Age, wood was scarce, so your ancestors built with what they had. At Mezherych in Ukraine, dating to around 15,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered the remains of 4 large structures built almost entirely from mammoth bones and tusks, walls constructed from interlocked jawbones, roofed with stretched hides, held down against the wind. Estimates suggest each structure required the bones of dozens of mammoths. This was not scavenging. This was planning. This was resource management across a landscape. They also went underground. The cave sites of southwestern France, Lascaux, Font de Gaume, the earlier Chauvet cave dated to around 36,000 years ago, were not simply art galleries. They were sheltered spaces deep enough in the rock to maintain a relatively stable temperature year-round, warmer than the frozen surface above. The art on those walls, the horses, the aurochs, the handprints, is extraordinary evidence of minds fully capable of abstraction, of symbolic thought, of something we might call culture. But the caves themselves were technology. Rock is an insulator. Your ancestors used geology as architecture. Fire was the axis around which everything else turned. The evidence for controlled fire use by Homo sapiens goes back at least 300,000 years at sites like Kesem Cave in Israel. But during the Ice Age, fire became existential. It was heat source, cooking technology, predator deterrent, and social anchor all at once. cooking food, rendering frozen or raw meat digestible, releasing calories that would otherwise pass through the body unused, may have been as important as the warmth itself. Richard Wrangham, a primatologist at Harvard University, has argued that cooking effectively gave early humans access to a caloric surplus that fueled the growth of the brain itself. By the Ice Age, your ancestors had been cooking for tens of thousands of years. They were very, very good at it. But none of the physical technology mattered as much as the social technology. The Ice Age was survived not by individuals and not even by single bands. It was survived by networks. Researchers studying the genetic and archaeological record of Upper Paleolithic Europe, the period from roughly 50,000 to 10,000 years ago, have found evidence of exchange networks spanning hundreds of miles. Shells from the Mediterranean coast appear at inland sites deep in Central Europe. Amber from the Baltic appears far to the south. The ochre used in cave paintings was sometimes transported from sources over 100 kilometers away. These objects moved because people moved, and because people traded. Information moved with them. Knowledge of where the herds were, where the passes through the mountains stayed open, where fresh water could be found under ice. This intelligence was the difference between a winter survived and a winter that killed you. Olga Soffer, an archaeologist at the University of Illinois, has documented evidence from sites across Eastern Europe suggesting that Upper Paleolithic groups manufactured textiles, woven plant fiber, and twisted cordage far earlier than previously assumed. Impressions of woven material left in fired clay at Pavlov in the Czech Republic, dated to around 26,000 years ago, show a sophistication in fiber technology that implies not just warmth, but storage, bags, baskets, nets for small game. The Ice Age diet was not only mammoth, it was a wide, flexible, opportunistic range of resources: fish, birds, small mammals, plant material in season, that made the group resilient against the failure of any single food source. That resilience was the real survival strategy. Not one tool, not one prey animal, not one technique. Breadth, flexibility, the willingness to try something new, to move when the conditions demanded it, to abandon a place that could no longer support life and walk towards the unknown. During the Last Glacial Maximum, some populations retreated to refugia, warmer pockets of landscape in southern Europe, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and waited. Genetic studies show modern European populations largely descend from these small, isolated groups who held on in the south while the ice held the north. They endured what climatologists call a bottleneck, a dramatic narrowing of the population, a near extinction, and then an expansion as the ice retreated around 12,000 years ago. Your ancestors survived the Ice Age because they were stubborn and clever and deeply, irreversibly social. They built things, they wore things, they drew things on cave walls in the dark by firelight. They traded objects across landscapes so vast they could never see the person on the other end. They kept each other warm, literally and otherwise. The ice retreated. The megafauna mostly did not survive, whether from overhunting or climate change or both. The mammoths and the cave lions and the woolly rhinos disappeared into the fossil record. But the small, naked, cold-adapted, tool-making, storytelling, network-building primate remained. You are what remained. Every piece of technology you have ever used, every building you have ever entered, every piece of clothing you have ever worn, it traces back in a straight, unbroken line to the people who figured out how to survive in a frozen world with nothing but their hands, their fires, and each other. The Ice Age did not break them. It built everything that came after.